So, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is exactly like it sounds. You are making the choice to stop eating and drinking food in order to bring your death on sooner. It can be something that could be a little bit uncomfortable, right? Because our bodies go through dehydration, hunger, all of those things. So it is really important that you have good support. It is completely legal in the United States. The Supreme Court has decided that we have the choice in denying ourselves medical care. If we do not want medical care, even if it will bring on our death, we have that choice, and they consider this to fall under that. So it's completely legal in all states.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. My guest today is Jill McClennen. And Jill, you are a death doula. Let me ask you, do you call yourself a death doula or end-of-life doula? What's your preference?
So yeah, I go back and forth, really depending on the audience that I'm speaking to. As much as there's the part of me that agrees we should say death as much as possible to get people comfortable with it, I also understand that for some people, just hearing that word is so triggering that they'll shut down if I say death doula. So sometimes I will say end-of-life doula just to soften it a tiny bit. But I prefer death doula because I do agree we need to say, the D word more often to get people comfortable with it.
Why do you think death is such a taboo topic? And let me ask you, the first question I always ask my guest is, what got you to this space?
So I'll start with what got me to this space, and then we'll go into why I think death is such a taboo topic. I was living in California, and I moved home to New Jersey to take care of my grandmother. She was turning 90, and right after I moved home, we found out she had cancer. So we took a 90-year-old who lived a really long, beautiful, healthy life and put her through radiation and surgeries and all of these things that I know now we really probably didn't have to do, and we probably should not have done, because that led to her having a really poor quality of life for the last 4 years that she was alive. And the last month or so that she was alive, when the doctor sent her home, because she had an infection from the radiation, so we sent her to the hospital because we couldn't control it. And the doctor sent her home and said, we're going to put her on hospice. Who takes care of her? And I said, oh, well, I do. I live with her, I'm the one that's there all the time. And they said, okay, well, here you go. Here's grandma, go home. And that first night, I realized that I had no idea what was going on, because something changed so drastically in her. I personally think that when she realized that she was dying, part of her already kind of started to check out a little bit. But the first night, I got up in the middle of the night because I heard her making noise downstairs, and I went down there, and she was like, well, who are you? And I was like, excuse me? And I was like, I'm your granddaughter. And she was like, no, you're not. You're the nurse. And I was like, no, I'm really not, though. I was very confused. And at the time, I had a 6-month-old baby. So I had the baby with me. And she said, oh, my granddaughter has a baby, too, about that age. So, she knew that I was a thing, but she did not know that I was that thing. By the time hospice showed up the next day, I was exhausted. I was in tears. I was so confused. I was so overwhelmed. And immediately the hospice nurse said, no, this is totally normal, totally natural. What she's experiencing is something we see all the time in people. And then they just started talking to me and explaining to me. And then I started to relax, and I started to really question and get curious about the process. And so then when she was up in the middle of the night and she was saying to me, you don't see those women behind you? There's women standing behind you and they're singing to me. And I was like, nope, I don't see anything. I'm looking over my shoulder because it's 2:00 in the morning. But rather than being afraid, I was curious because I knew then to expect it. I knew that it was normal and it was natural. So after she died, I said to my husband, I think I want to go back to school and I want to be a hospice nurse because, man, this is beautiful work and it's needed and it's just something that I can see myself doing. I actually even talked to one of the hospice nurses at one point as she was doing things to my grandmother that I was like, I don't know if I could do that, but I really would love to be a hospice nurse. She was like, oh, you could do these things. I still was like, I don't know. And I still agree that I don't think I'm set to be a nurse. But at that time I had a 6-month-old baby. I had a bakery because that's what my husband and I did. We're both pastry chefs. And so it just wasn't the right timing. And then I heard of a death doula in 2019. And at that point I was turning 40 and I was already kind of like questioning, what did I want to do with the rest of my life? Because I didn't want to be in a kitchen for the rest of my life. It's really hard work. And so I started thinking about it and then was like, yeah, I think that's the thing. That's what I want to do. And so I started my training in January 2020, thinking it would take me probably 6 or 7 years to get the training done because
just noting January of 2020. So yeah, just a couple months before the pandemic.
Exactly.
So what was it like? What was it like for you as a newly vetted death doula that's now stepping into a
craziness? Yeah. No, I mean, it was honestly life-changing for me as a person, to be learning about death and learning about grief and realizing how much grief I'd been carrying my whole life, but didn't know that that's even what it was. And, you know, facing some of my worst fears as a parent, you know, by reading stories of people whose children died, of all different things, right? And just like really submerging myself in this. And then also because everything switched to online, I found a group of like death doulas and people in California that they were doing death overdrafts in person, but they switched to online. So then I was like every Friday night getting together with all these people that had way more knowledge and experience than I did, which I wouldn't have been able to do if it wasn't for the pandemic. And then also like the fear and the anxiety of people dying, like it just was a crazy time to be in this space. Plus then I got my training done a lot faster than I expected. So next thing I know, it's like July of 2020 and I'm like, I guess I'm really a death doula and I have a website and I have a business now. Like, what am I going to do with this? But that was something that changed the way, like before we started recording, we talked about gratitude of every day. And it really did change the way that I approach my life daily because I have so much more gratitude. I'm more present. And I think because of the fact that I did the training while also in a state of like hyper awareness of like, I don't know what's going to happen. People I love might die. I might die, even though I didn't think it was likely, you know, you don't know. And so, yeah, that was intense, but you know, it goes even into, you know, your first question about like, why are people so afraid of death? We've just avoided it. And because of the culture that we live in, you know, we're really blessed in that our daily life for most of us is not touched by death in the way that other countries or we used to be in the past. You know, we talk about people like my grandmother, she was 94 when she died. She was born in 1916. She was born on a farm. You know, there was like 11 kids, I think. And her mother somehow did not lose any, but they lived through the Spanish flu. Like my grandmother wasn't born yet. But she used to tell me stories of my grandfather going to the other farms and how literally entire families were dying. And there was nothing but like 1 or 2 children left over because the other 8 people died. And so that's not our experience. So we're so far removed from it that all we know when we think of death is either what we see on TV and movies, which is not accurate. No, not accurate at all in most cases.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating that, you know, we can't talk about our personal death and preparing for it, which is, you know, what it means to be prepared for it. And yet we're so addicted to killer, slash 'em, shoot 'em, car chase, you know, living on the edge of like, if the book or the movie doesn't have some sort of twist or plot that involves someone's life either being wiped off or being at risk for wiped off, then we think it's not an interesting book
Yeah.
or storyline.
True crime podcast, top podcast. But yet, at the same time, the same people that I personally know that love true crime podcasts, if I say to them, have you thought about what you want at the end of your life? Have you and your husband talked about what'll happen if you end up in the hospital? And they're like, oh, I can't talk about that. And I'm like, what? I don't understand. That is something I truly don't understand. How on one hand, we're so obsessed with death, but on the other hand, we're so terrified of it. It's like, it makes no sense.
And then people just don't plan for it. We don't talk about it. We don't, it boggles my mind. And here we are as professionals really trying hard to, I mean, you and I, we're educators.
Yes.
We're trying to educate people. You know, for you, it is that as a death doula, you sit vigilance, right? You are bedside with a person who literally is at end of life. That's what an end of life death doula does. For me as a thanatologist and a digital thanatologist, I want to talk about the pre-planning. Let's do you have all your administrative pieces together? And yet, people will spend time looking at nurse, hospice nurse Julie or Penny or Lauren or all of those influencers, which with a lot of gratitude that they're bringing the topic into real life situation, but they're still looking at it as a third person.
Yeah.
And not stepping into it. So, so for those that can see the video, if you're not on video, see my video. I actually have this. I have our mascot behind me, a picture of a cartoonish skeleton that we call as our mascot, called Jessie. And it's interesting how when I get on a call with somebody, they'll ask me. I'll get two people. They'll either say, "Hey, that skeleton's freaking me out. Can you blur your background?"
Oh my gosh.
So that'll be one. Or I'll get the other, which is, "Cool skeleton in the background. Are you a Grateful Dead fan?"
Yeah.
So it's just like, can we normalize it? But let's get into you as a death doula. What do you find is the most meaningful work that you bring to your clients?
Yeah, interestingly enough, when you say how I sit bedside, I've done very little actual sitting bedside as a death doula. In my head, when I did my training, of course, that's what we all want to do. Most of the work that I've done with people is almost that pre-planning, talking with them about what's important to them as they're nearing the end of life. Some of it is written, right? We do write it down. Some of it's just the conversation to help them get clear on it. And for me, I don't know if there's any parts of it that I find more meaningful than the other. They're just very different things. Personally, I do love to sit with people as they're in what we would consider the active dying phase. I did more of that, though, as a volunteer in the hospital than I've ever been paid for it. But that's a very different place to be, especially when you don't know the person, when you don't know much about them, you don't know what's important to them or what they care about. Where when I can talk with a family and help them get clear on what they want, why they want it, answer questions. Most people, again, when you see intubation on TV, it's not what it looks like in real life. When you see CPR on TV, exactly.
CPR on an 80-year-old,
no,
not a good thing. Not a good thing. Well, hold on. Let's circle back just from an educational standpoint. Some people might not know what that active dying stage is. So let's just take a moment and educate them on what it means to watch someone go through this physical, it's like the last stage that the physical body is going through. And again, this is more on hospice, people who are literally at end of life. So what has been your experience? So from a 101, hey, this is what it looks like to be actively dying.
Yeah, and you're right. This is not, sudden death. This is somebody has an illness, most likely. They're, progressing to, down a path, and oftentimes they are on hospice. And The active dying phase is really like maybe the last week to a couple days of somebody's life. It's different for every person. Some people it, drags on a little bit longer, but usually it's those last few days. And there are certain signs that you can look for if you're sitting with somebody. Like, so for example, a friend of mine just last week, her mother-in-law was dying. And so she was like, it feels like it's taking forever, like we're watching her and we're just sitting there and, so I started asking some questions like, well, how about her breathing? Has her breathing started to change? Is it starting to make strange noises? There's like a gurgling sound. And she was like, no, not yet. She's just sleeping a lot more. And I was like, all right, well, sleeping a lot more is for sure one of the signs. How about eating? Has she eaten anything? Has she drank anything? She said, no, she's not eating or drinking. We're just using the swabs to keep her mouth moist. So like there are these signs that the body is shutting down, and it's normal and it's natural, right? That like we're not going to want to eat or drink as the body's starting to shut down. We are going to sleep more. But then there also will sometimes be this like surge of energy where then they're like awake and they're alert and everybody's like, oh, look, they're getting better. No, they're not getting better. It's just something that does often happen, but not to everybody. And the gurgling.
They call that the rally.
They do call that the rally. Yep. And then with the gurgling sounds, what I told my friend is I was like, look, that's just because the body's shutting down. You can't swallow, the saliva anymore. So it builds up in the throat. So when you hear it, just know that like they're comfortable. It's not painful. It's just harder for us when we're the person that's sitting and we have to, hear that and think there's something wrong. I was like, sometimes they'll gasp, like there's these normal, natural things. That's why I think doula, right? Where you have birth doulas and death doulas. Anybody that's ever had a baby or been in the room with somebody who's had a baby, there's sounds, there's smells. Like it's not necessarily
the human body
pleasant.
is not a gentle.
No,
well, I mean just anybody, any physical body, right? We're not just talking to humans, any species.
Yeah.
That I think the birth, and that's why they call it a doula, right? Whether it's a birth doula or a death doula.
Yeah.
It's interesting how we're going to the light, right? I mean, you go through the birth canal towards the light, and they talk about at the end of life that you walk down a tunnel of sort and going to the light. So it really is that full cycle, no matter what your belief is, that there is some association between both that birth and death.
Yes.
And it's messy because coming into this space, this dimension, and leaving it, there has to be some sort of like process that we go through. It's fascinating. I mean, now you and I are going down the rabbit hole. Like, this is the stuff that keeps me like, this becomes juicy, right?
Yes.
This is like, what does it mean to be human or to be alive? I don't even want to use the word human because we just put a dog down, our beloved dog on Monday. And I wish that we could, having been through end of life with our dog, and then I have a father-in-law who's 96 years old in a nursing home, and my heart breaks. I've talked about it before. Our family is not on the same page about his course of treatment, and we don't. My husband and I don't necessarily have control over this end stage of life, but it's like, I wish we could give my father-in-law the same options and decisions that we did for our beloved dog.
Yes. Yeah.
So as a death doula, there are some practices that people might not be aware of that let's kind of go into it. What do you find when you're talking to your patients and they're ready, like mentally, they're like, okay, I'm good to go. I've said my goodbyes and I'm ready, but their bodies aren't necessarily at that point. As a end-of-life death doula, how do you support them and what kind of educational content do you provide?
It is very tough because that does sometimes happen. I mean, honestly, I'd say often that happens where people are tired of living, especially if they've gone through a long illness and they're just tired. They're ready to be done, but their body is not necessarily going to be ready. And my biggest thing is, first thing I like to do is just talk to people and do more listening than talking. Find out what's important to them. Listen to their fears, their concerns. Also, just being that safe person for somebody to say, I think I'm done. I don't want to do treatment anymore. I'm uncomfortable. This isn't doing anything to make my life better. I'm ready to die. And to not be, oh, you don't mean that, or like, what do you mean you're going to give up the fight? The things that so many people will say, including in the medical community. It's not like it's just their friends and family. And so I start off with that space of just listening to them. And if somebody really is ready to go, but their body's not necessarily ready, depending on what state they live in, they can access medical aid in dying. If they are not in a state where medical aid in dying is legal, you can still do VSED, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So it's not that I would ever suggest that anybody do that. But if they were to say to me, do I have any options? I'll just talk them through the different options and realistically what that would look like. Do you have to see a doctor? Do you need a prescription? Is there a wait time? Like, what is it going to look like if you go down that path? If that's not what they want, then that's fine too. Then I'll just support them through helping them find whatever care they might need. Sometimes it really is just enough if somebody is able to say, I'm really ready to go. Why is my body not doing this? Like, I want to be done. Why is my body not? Sometimes when you talk it through with them, then they can feel okay, right? They can feel better about it. So it's a difficult place to be because we don't have choices and options. And because of the medical care, it's wonderful that we've had advancements in medical care. Also, it does keep people alive a lot longer and not always with a good quality of life. And so we kind of get stuck in this place sometimes where we're alive, but we're not living, and we don't have any options on how to stop that, at least not easily. So, and I have had clients that even have said, like, I'll just take all my medication. I'm like, no, don't do that.
Please
Don't do that. No.
And please.
Yeah.
And let's just get into the logistics of it, right? So, one piece people don't realize that by taking your medication, what you don't want on your death certificate is they usually put the cause of death on the death certificate. And by putting suicide, I believe that if you have suicide on your death certificate, and I'm not an attorney or a life insurance agent, so I have to get this verified, but I don't believe that death by suicide allows you to receive life insurance benefits.
Yeah, I believe that's correct, but you're right. Same thing. I'm not an expert in that, but that is what I've heard.
That's not please do your own research, but please, so when you have someone who is at end of life and they decide to take their own life, there are ramifications, right? So, and being on, we talked about medical aid in dying, which is the death with dignity laws. For those that aren't familiar, this is assisted suicide. This is
yeah, I was going to say that's a big thing. Yeah, we really try to get away from using suicide, right? Because the person has to be terminal and they have to be dying anyway. So it's assisted death. And they have to get
medical. So let's just get clear. So when it's really not. It's euthanizing. You're euthanizing yourself.
Well, so yes, euthanizing is when a doctor does it. That is legal in some countries, but not in the United States. You have to be able to take the medication yourself. So it is suicide in that sense, right? That you are taking medication that is ending your life. But it's not really suicide in the sense of that they're not choosing to end their life. And I mean, again, and I'm in that gray area of like, if you're depressed enough, like, I don't know, should people be able to access it or not?
Some countries do allow medical aid in dying for people who are suffering from long-term mental health issues.
Correct.
So, but let's just, for our sake here, in these 12 states, currently 12, and that's constantly fluctuating, where medical aid is legal,
Yep.
it basically means that you have to have a diagnosis of 6 months or less,
Correct.
and you have to be evaluated by, I believe, two physicians.
Two physicians that confirm that you are terminal 6 months or less. Yeah.
And then going down that path. It's challenging because early on stage Alzheimer's or dementia are not considered terminal diagnoses.
Correct.
So some people run out of options. And then when they do become terminal, they're not, and also in order to activate the medical aid in dying, you need to be of sound mind.
Correct. Even the day that I administer the medication, they have to be able to consume it themselves. I can mix it, I could hand them the glass, I could hold the glass for them. But I have to look them in the face and say, you do understand that when you take this medication, it will end your life. And they have to be able to say, yes, they understand. And, that is something that there can't be any, confusion. There can't be any lack of understanding what's happening. They have to be very clear-minded to be able to respond that way, which means that you also have a little bit of a window, where you may not be able to take it yourself if your disease progresses to a certain point. But that's where a lot of people, I don't know about a lot. Again, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that there is a significant amount of people that just getting the medication prescription, even having the medication in their home, is enough to make them feel in control, that they don't even end up taking it. They still die naturally. But it gives them this sense of, but if it does get unbearable, I have an option. Because that's the biggest thing. For some people, these diseases, it's unbearable. And then there's still that, well, you might live months after this. And so it gives them the choice. I mean, the one person that I worked with, it was cancer, had the prescription for maybe 2 months before the family called and said, they want to take it, but we need some support. And he just got to that point where he was in so much pain that he was like, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it.
Choice.
And and it was his choice, and his family supported his choice. They understood. Of course, you're still going to be sad, but again, the person's dying anyway. Like, you're going to be sad when they die anyway. At least if they have the choice to end their own suffering when it's up to them, that to me feels like a better option than allowing somebody to just go on living in extreme pain and suffering.
So let's talk about the other option that people are not as aware of, which is also a legal term called voluntary stop drinking and eating, or VSED. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing a lot of listeners might not be familiar with VSED. So as a death doula, 101, explain to our listeners how VSED can be used, what documentation needs to be done, because there is a process. You can't just stop. You need to be signing documents. And then as from a support standpoint, whether it's professional support from a death doula or the family support, what do you feel is needed?
Okay, so I'm like, all right, let's see.
It's a big topic.
Yeah, no, it is a big topic. So I'm like, we're going to try to get this out as concisely as possible. So voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is exactly like it sounds. You are making the choice to stop eating and drinking food in order to bring your death on sooner. It can be something that could be a little bit uncomfortable, right? Because our bodies go through dehydration, hunger, all of those things. So it is really important that you have good support. It is completely legal in the United States. The Supreme Court has decided that we have the choice in denying ourselves medical care. If we do not want medical care, even if it will bring on our death, we have that choice, and they consider this to fall under that. So it's completely legal in all states. Have people done it without support and without documentation? I'm sure they have, right? But it's probably better if you do have some support and documentation. And when I work with somebody around VSED, I have them write a letter. Like I have a form, right, that they can just kind of like fill in their own information that basically is just saying, I understand that if I stop eating and drinking, it will bring on my death. I hope that my family and the people around me support my decision. Please do not offer me food or water. If I do ask for it, you don't have to deny it, but don't offer it to me. So it's just kind of this like standard letter that's just stating like that, again, I understand this is the process that I'm choosing to do. In New Jersey, at least, it only has to be witnessed by 2 people. It does not have to be notarized. Other states, it might be different. You might have to have it notarized. They also suggest that you create videos to yourself and to your family members, again, stating the same thing, that I'm choosing to do this. This is why I want to do it. I want to be in control. The people that I've worked with around it, again, they're not terminal. In one case, it was dementia, like that they realized that they, first off, were older. They already had a whole list of things going wrong, and now they are also being diagnosed with Alzheimer's and want to be in control. So again, we have that little bit of a window where they eventually get to the point where they can't consent to doing this on their own.
So this patient was not on hospice.
No.
But an elderly patient, over 80 plus, already had multiple medical conditions that was impeding quality of life.
Yep.
And comes to you and says, you know, I'm not dying, but there's a part of me that's already ready to go.
Yes.
And they wanted to take advantage of that. So you don't necessarily have to be in hospice in order to activate VSED.
No, you do not have to have any terminal diagnosis to choose to use VSED. And there have been cases of people that just choose it because they're older and they, again, have no quality of life. There's no illness that's going to cause them to die. But it is an option for people. It's one of the few options for people if you do have a dementia diagnosis or ALS or something that will, again, rob you of life. But you need to be able to use it or choose to do this in that window. But it also is not super quick, right? It on average takes 10 to 15 days. And sounds like the first 3 days are probably the worst because that's when, again, they're kind of going through that dehydration, the hunger. But then at about 3 days, then they actually will qualify for hospice because it's failure to thrive. And so then most of the time people will bring hospice on. It's a good idea to hire some caregivers so that it doesn't just fall on the family. But again, that's a whole other thing with hospice. Even everybody thinks hospice comes in and it's 24-hour care, and that is not the case. You still have to caregive your person no matter what they're dying from. But so hiring caregivers can be really helpful. But then again, you also need people to understand and not try to offer somebody food and water because we're so... in our culture, it's like, that's what we do. We feed people, right? Like we have this desire to make sure that they're eating and drinking, and we can't have anything to eat or drink if you're doing VSED. So it's definitely something that having a good support system is important. Ideally, if somebody could get a doctor on board to support those first couple of days before they even qualify for hospice, that would be lovely. But so far, I've never gotten anybody, and no other death doula that I've ever talked to that's done VSED has ever gotten anybody to get on board to help support. Because even for me, the first couple of conversations that I've had with every hospice all over the state of New Jersey that I've gotten to talk to me about VSED, none of them have even known what it was. They didn't know anything about it. It's always had to go to their medical director because they're not sure what it is. And most of them won't even talk to me now about it. So I was surprised and frustrated by that because you would think that it would be more widely known, but it's not. So it is an option. It's not an easy option. And I don't think that any of this should ever be easy, But also, I think supporting people in having control over when their life ends is important. And actually, one of the hospices that I spoke with, the woman that I talked to, it was interesting because she said she went to her medical director and they said, well, we're not comfortable supporting anybody that is causing their own death. And she said, well, what about people that are dying from liver cirrhosis because they were alcoholics, or somebody dying from lung cancer because they smoked their whole life? Like, they technically did something that is causing their death. But this is different for people. It's also new and unknown. So there's always that too.
Well, hopefully this conversation has enlightened people. And now they have a new terminology to do their own research, voluntarily, right? VSED, voluntary stopping eating and drinking, that it is an option when we talk about end of life. And the, what it means to be a death doula, which just opens up that conversation, to have those difficult conversations and those taboo, to de-tabootize this very important conversation. And with that, Jill, this was just an awesome conversation. Can you please share with us, one or two takeaways that our listeners can really start thinking about or actually take action on?
Have conversations with your family about end of life. Right? And it doesn't have to be a serious conversation. You don't have to sit down and be like, we need to talk about this topic. More just like, hey, have you thought about what you want for a funeral? Have you thought about what is important to you, right? Just like start the conversation. And honestly, it will help you live your life better if you are not afraid of death. If you have these conversations, if you think about it, it will help you live your life better and actually experience living, not waiting until you get to the end, which is what so many people do. They get to the end and then they say to me, I didn't live my life. I'm like, I'm so sorry to hear that, because now we're at the end and I could just sit and listen, but we can't go back and do it all over again. So those are always my points, where I'm like, getting clear that death is part of life will help you actually live your life.
Live fully, die ready, is what we say.
Exactly.
And where can people find you if they want to learn more about your services?
So I am all over social media, and my website is End of Life Clarity. That's my business name. So for sure there. And then I also have my own podcast, which you're going to be a guest on too, which I'm excited about, awesome. Where I have more of these conversations with professionals and also just regular people, so that the more that we get comfortable hearing other people talk about death and dying, the more we'll be comfortable talking about it ourselves. And the podcast is Seeing Death Clearly, kind of a play on the business name.
Awesome. And with that, thank you so much for joining me today. This was just a meaningful conversation, an important one as well. We learned a lot of new terms. And with that, we'll end our conversation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.